You don't want to hear from me, do you? You just want to know what lies behind possibly the greatest comic book cover of all time. The last we saw, Spidey's hand had burst from the grave. And now? This is one of those comics that is very well known and everyone thinks they know exactly how it begins. But most of those people, myself included, are wrong. Because it doesn't begin with Spider-Man bursting through the earth of his grave. In fact, it's nothing like that at all. We're with Peter. Only Peter. And he is at peace. He's also confused because he doesn't know where he is, although he likes the peace and tranquility of it. And he doesn't know who he is, although Ned Leeds helps him to remember. It's only as Peter's memories and consciousness slowly return to him that he realises it can't be Ned Leeds, because Ned Leeds is dead. But there is another name that comes to him. He then begins to think of himself as the Spider. And what is he? Is he the Spider? Is he Peter Parker? After battling some demonic rats, he, Peter Parker, emerges from the Spider. And he seems now to understand how Kraven thinks of him. He says that Kraven thought he was some kind of a magical being, some kind of creature. But he isn't. He's just a guy that's tapped on the shoulder by fate. And again, that name comes back to him. He says Kraven murdered a mask. He didn't murder a man. He doesn't know who Peter Parker is. He doesn't even care who Peter Parker is. After all, when Kraven had Spider-Man in the casket, he didn't even bother unmasking him. And now Peter is driven on more and more. Not by desire for revenge or even honour, but by his love for Mary Jane. But he isn't afraid of Kraven. He is afraid of never again seeing MJ. And of course here we have another awesome image from Mike Zeck. Not quite as good as the cover, but even so, darn it's good. Of course he's weak, and he soon finds out why, as he discovers from abandoned newspapers that Kraven has taken over the role of Spider-Man, and he himself has been in the ground for 2 weeks. Understandably, he doesn't take the news well, and he takes it out on Kraven's collection of hunting trophies. When 2 of Kraven's lackeys turn up, all Spidey wants to know is where is Kraven, because he wants to teach him a lesson. But Kraven isn't his top priority. This is Peter we're talking about. So of course he isn't thinking about himself, he's thinking of MJ, what she must have been through for these last 2 weeks. He thinks, knowing her, she probably went out looking for him. And of course, as we know, he's right. He announces his arrival with probably the most famous sound effect in comics. And then we get a visual representation of the difference between Spider-Man and Peter Parker. At the window, there he is, Spider-Man. No other hero, no other character poses like that. Then he peels off his mask in a great little image. And then, look, that isn't Spider-Man standing there. That isn't the spider. That is the man, the loving husband. What's the first thing we will learn about Spider-Man? That with great power comes... Exactly. As soon as he awakes, Peter suits up. He doesn't want to leave MJ. He doesn't want to leave the safety of their home. But Kraven has killed in his name. He has to find him. He has to confront him. The irony is, he doesn't think about honour, but he is impelled to do the honourable thing. Again, we get a physical transformation. From the man to the Spider-Man. Of course Mary Jane doesn't want him to go, but of course she gets it. We then get 2.5 pages without any dialogue, before Kraven thinks he's here. We hear a lot more from Kraven in part 5, beginning with the assertion that people thought his mother was insane and took her own life. But Kraven disagrees. He says she didn't take her own life, it was taken from her by the spider. He knows now that Spider-Man is just a man, but within him is the demon, the spider. The demon that brought Russia to its knees, that destroyed his father, and that took his mother's life. And now he, Kraven, has defeated that demon. Spidey wants to fight, but Kraven doesn't. But why would he? He doesn't need to. He's already won. But his victory isn't entirely complete yet, because he needs Spider-Man to understand how comprehensively he has been beaten, how comprehensively he has been bested by Kraven. He could have killed him. He did replace him. And now he takes him down into the basement to show him another way in which he has proved himself Spider-Man's superior. There we find Vermin in an electrified cage. Kraven points out that Spider-Man couldn't defeat him alone. He could only barely defeat him when assisted by Captain America. But he could. And now Kraven releases Vermin, because he believes that once Vermin defeats Spider-Man, Spider-Man will understand and accept that Kraven is his superior. Now it's Spider-Man's turn to not want to fight. But necessity soon changes his mind. When he realises he's doing exactly what Kraven wants, he stops. Vermin doesn't. As an impassive Kraven looks on, he decides he's seen all he needs to see. His point has been made, and he brings the fight to an end. Vermin is allowed to go free, and Kraven sees that Spider-Man is a man, a good man, and it has been an honour for him to have been his spider. He then says to Spider-Man, "Go on, go and follow Vermin." And Spidey says, "I'm not going to leave you." To which Kraven says, "Of course you will, because a man like you won't let Vermin run loose." And Spidey says, "What, I'm going to let you go free so you can carry on ruining people's lives?" To which Kraven replies that by now Spider-Man must know that he is a man of his word. And then he utters the immortal line that from that night forward, Kraven the Hunter will never hunt again. Kraven then watches with that calm reservation of someone that has made the ultimate decision. He watches Spider-Man leave. We see him enter the sewers of New York. And then we see Kraven looking at the picture of him as a young boy with his parents. His mother was killed by the spider. Now, with the spider defeated, he is at peace, and with his mother in his last thoughts, he goes to join her. I think this is as good a time as any to look at the cohesion between the various covers of this storyline. Both of the Web of Spider-Man covers featured only Spider-Man. The Amazing Spider-Man covers were the only ones that featured Kraven, and the Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man covers were the only ones that featured Vermin. But this connectivity goes beyond the art. The Web of Spider-Man chapter titles went from that symbol of death, the coffin, to resurrection, and the Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man chapters, despite both focusing on battle in the sewers, had similarly contrasting titles, as issue 131's Descent was contrasted by the following issues Ascending. The fate of Vermin in those two issues is just as contrasting, but it's not my job to tell you about that. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is back underground, and it's giving him flashbacks to being in the grave. He doesn't want to be there. Kraven the Hunter willingly descended into the sewers because he wanted to find Vermin and wanted to beat him. Spider-Man doesn't want to be there, but nonetheless, because of his sense of responsibility, he's there, because how could he let the cannibal killer roam free? Presumably, this is within 24 hours of him emerging from the grave. Speaking of which, the gravedigger from issue 1 is back. We get some suitably filthy looking pictures from Mike Zeck, and then as Spider-Man fights off the rats that Vermin has sent to him, we see that the police department have raided Kraven's townhouse after receiving an anonymous tip-off. They find that Kraven has left behind a confession, one that it seems is very comprehensive. Back in the sewers, after the rats have run off, Spider-Man finds the cannibal killer himself. The two of them fight, but Spider-Man is still coming to terms with what's happened to him over the last 2 weeks. And as he's pulled underwater, those feelings overwhelm him, and he's back in the grave once more. We get some more great artwork in the sewers before Spider-Man finally manages to web up Vermin. And he says to him, "Listen, it wasn't me that put you in that cage. That was Kraven. But he's still struggling to keep the emotional floodgates closed, and all it takes is for Vermin to say Spider-Man is bad and that he's going to get his rats to take care of him, that Spider-Man loses it, and in a sudden fit of anger, he cracks Vermin in the jaw. His internal monologue tells us he did that because he's afraid. He just wants to get out of those sewers, get out above ground again, up out of the darkness. He tries to remember that there is more to Vermin than just this rat creature before him. Deep inside, there is a man. And he says to Vermin he wants to help him. He wants to take him up out of the darkness. But that isn't something that Vermin wants. And he tears free of the webbing. At this point in the story, something happens that neither Spider-Man nor Vermin are aware of. Back up above the sewers, that weather, the heavy torrential rain that's been falling throughout this story, has stopped. The storm has broken. Something else that breaks at this point is Spider-Man. Once more, Vermin puts him under the surface of the water. And once more, in his mind, he is under the earth. He succumbs to his fear, his desire, his desperation to get out of the dark and into the light. And he runs off. Vermin, sensing victory, pursues him and is so desperate for revenge that he follows him up and out of the sewer, into the outside world, into the light. But that light, bright world is also a noisy, busy one. And just as Vermin is going to be run down by a lorry, Spider-Man swings in and saves him. Because this is the real difference between Peter Parker, the man, and Sergei Kravenov, the man. It's not about how many foes you can defeat, or even which foes you can defeat without help. That's not real, true honour. When Kraven the Hunter defeated Vermin, he put him in an electrically charged cage. Now, not only has Peter saved Vermin's life, but now that he has him wrapped up in his webbing, he goes a step further and says he's going to get him help. He says there's a man he knows called Reed Richards, and if anybody can help Vermin, he can. Spider-Man then swings off, leaving Vermin in the care of some cops who say it's incredible that Spider-Man has done that after all Kraven did to him. Spidey wonders how they could possibly know what Kraven did to him. I guess he'll find out when he next picks up the paper. We get another page of minimal dialogue as Peter finally, truly returns home. Before, with the sun rising, we see Kraven's coffin being lowered into the grave and his gravestone, which reads, "Here lies Sergei Kravenov, Kraven the Hunter. He died with honour." With that, Kraven found himself back on the A-list of Spider-Man's villains, with the small drawback that he was now dead. Kraven's Last Hunt was massively popular as soon as it hit the shelves and spinneracks. But now its star could no longer be used. Not unless Marvel gave it the what-if treatment, of course. So that's exactly what Marvel did. 3 years later, in 1990, issue 17 of Volume 2 of What If asked the question, what if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Kraven himself had said it in Part 5. He could have killed Spider-Man if he so wished. So how would that have turned out? Of course, there was no way that this could have matched the quality of the original storyline, especially as it wasn't written by DeMatteis. But surely it could have had a better cover. This is by John Romita Jr., and although his art irritates me at times, he is certainly capable of better work than this. Compared to Zek's covers, they look like they belong to a different universe, which I suppose in a way they do. John Romita Jr. wasn't the internal artist, that was Richard Howell. Not heard of him? I'm not surprised. He worked for both of the big two, as well as a number of smaller publishers, but only ever seemed to produce an issue here and an issue there. His most significant contributions were for Hawkman and the 12-issue Vision and Scarlet Witch limited series in the mid-80s. He was also a writer and wrote this. So, with a firm grip on both typewriter and easel, let's see where he took this most famous of stories. After the Watcher gives us his usual spiel about I am the Watcher and I see how various events can turn out differently, we get a retelling of part 1 of Kraven's Last Hunt, but with thought bubbles and inferior art. Another big change, of course, is that in this version of reality, Kraven doesn't shoot Spider-Man with a mixture of herbs and drugs. He shoots him with a bullet, and thus Spider-Man is dead. Rather than the sombre Kraven from James Mattis' story, here we see a jubilant Kraven dancing with joy beside Spider-Man's coffin. There are some elements from this alternate reality that touch on aspects that we are familiar with from the story, such as Kraven eating the spiders and claiming that it isn't enough simply to defeat Spider-Man. He says he must become him. He must prove himself superior to Spider-Man. And here we have the big problem with this issue, because we're told that the big change here in this reality is that Kraven shot Spider-Man with a bullet rather than herbs or whatever else he shot him with in the original story. But for that to have happened, there must have been a deeper, more substantial change, because we know how important it was to Kraven that Spider-Man knew he had been bested by him. And he said his victory is not complete unless and until Spider-Man sees that. Well, of course, in killing him, all of that is out the window. We have the familiar scene of Kraven saving Mary Jane from those 2 creeps out in the rain-soaked streets. But then after that, rather than visiting Robbie Robertson, she rings him up. She visits Flash Thompson, and together they go and see J. Jonah Jameson to ask if he knows where Peter is. Having no luck there, they take things up a notch by visiting the Human Torch. He says he knows Peter Parker. He's met him before. It says here, Peter Parker from Queens? I know him. Oh, there's a little asterisk. Let's have a look. See Amazing Spider-Man, issue 21? That's all right. I'll just take your word for it. The Human Torch doesn't know where Peter is. But after MJ insists to him that the Spider-Man that's out there at the moment isn't the real Spider-Man, he thinks there may be something in that. So he puts in a couple of calls to some friends. The first is Steve Rogers. I'm not really sure why. And the second one is Daredevil. Now that makes more sense. They too agree that Spider-Man's recent behaviour doesn't seem like him at all. So all 3 of them set out to find him. The first one to find Spider-Man is the Human Torch. He tries to talk to him, mentioning their usual meet-up place. But Kraven says he doesn't know what meeting place he's talking about. And after briefly driving off the Human Torch, he makes good his escape. The fact he didn't know that Spider-Man and the Human Torch regularly met up at the Statue of Liberty tells Johnny Storm that that wasn't Spider-Man. Hours later, as Kraven is whittering on to a couple of criminals about how he's going to devour them, I much preferred the less talkative Kraven from the original. Daredevil enters the scene. Rather than taking Johnny's friendly approach, he takes the fight to Kraven, but is bested by him. And after Kraven leaves, Daredevil realises that this new Spider-Man's heartbeat is different from the Spider-Man's heartbeat that he knows. The hat-trick is complete the next morning as Captain America finds Kraven and they begin to fight. During the fight, there's a couple that are out walking their baby in the pouring rain, and Kraven grabs them and pushes them. Mildly worrying, I suppose. We also get more of Kraven's rantings and ravings, and I've got to say, it's getting really tedious reading that now, because it doesn't really move things forward. He's not engaging with the heroes. He's just going on and on about the spider and his mother being insane. As Kraven again runs off, Cap thinks the Spider-Man he knows would never put bystanders at risk. At risk of what? Grazed knees? Later on, the 3 heroes meet to compare notes, and Mary Jane arrives for an update. They tell her that she was right, but they're curious as to how she was so certain that that wasn't the real Spider-Man. There must be something she knows and she isn't telling them. After telling her that whatever she has to say will be treated with the strictest of confidence, she confesses Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And now we catch up with the third main player from Kraven's Last Hunt, who's been a little bit neglected until now. That's right, it's Werewolf by Night. Oh, Sorry, my mistake. It's Vermin. Oh, he doesn't compare very well with the original, does he? In this reality, he attacks Jameson. But before he can do any harm, Kraven arrives. Still ranting, of course. He fights off Vermin and is close to killing him when our three heroes arrive to finally put a stop to his rampage. Outmaneuvered by the heroes, Kraven once again runs off, this time in the direction of a graveyard, muttering about how he must consume the spider to get more power. Naturally, the heroes follow him to see what he's up to, and they discover, and here's the kicker, that he has become a cannibal and bit by bit has been eating Spider-Man's corpse. The first time I read this, I thought this is pretty extreme, but it does make sense. Kraven's obsession has crossed the line into complete madness, and he has reached this point, this extreme but logical point. Now, having reread Kraven's Last Hunt, I see it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with Kraven's original motives. The heroes quickly subdue him and say their final farewells to Spider-Man. But don't go anywhere. We've still got 8 pages left. The news of Peter's fate is broken to Mary Jane. We don't know what Johnny Storm says to her, but that moment is described to us in the most wordy way possible. Kraven, doing his best Wolverine impression, is committed to a mental asylum for life. Mary Jane delivers the double whammy to Aunt May that Peter was not only Spider-Man, but he is now dead. Aunt May doesn't take it at all well, and she kicks Mary Jane out of the house. But she doesn't do her old trick of having a heart attack. After the funeral, Mary Jane tells the Human Torch that she wants to hold a press conference. Spider-Man in life was widely misunderstood, and she wants to tell the world what kind of a man Peter really was, how good he was, and the good things he was trying to do. The press conference, however, is interrupted by Jameson. He doesn't believe what's being said. He says the heroes are taking advantage of this poor, grieving widow, and that it's just not true. Peter wasn't Spider-Man. They're all in it together. They're just trying to cover for their friend who went off the tracks. The Torch tries to shut him up, but Jameson attacks him with his crutch. This is reported in the papers, however, as the Human Torch attacking Jameson. And suddenly the general public are beginning to come round to Jameson's way of thinking. They say he was right all along. These superheroes are menaces. In fact, public opinion gathers so much momentum that the president signs an injunction against any superheroes using their powers. Robbie Robertson tells Jameson this, and he says, "I hope you're happy." And he is. Jameson feels that he has finally won his war against costumed creeps. We see the Avengers disbanded, along with the Fantastic Four. And we finish by visiting Peter's grave with Mary Jane. She is saying that she's sorry for how things have turned out, that she never wanted his death to result in the abolition of all superheroes. She swears that she will spend the rest of her life fighting against Jameson's crusade and for the truth. She pledges that she will not let a world devoid of superheroes be Spider-Man's legacy. And we finish with the Watcher telling us that although Mary Jane is widowed, she now has renewed purpose in her life, which is an attempt to inject a little bit of positivity in what is otherwise an incredibly gloomy ending. I feel quite depressed after that. So aside from a what if, there's no way that Marvel could use Kraven. Unless, I don't know, he came back as a ghost or something. I don't know why I play these silly games. In 1992, 5 years after the original storyline, the original creators returned to it. The ending of Kraven's Last Hunt was controversial to some, as they saw it as glorifying suicide. After all, didn't his gravestone announce that he died with honour? JM felt that this had to be addressed, that he had to explain that suicide wasn't honourable. Hence, this one-shot, The Soul of the Hunter, was released. Mike Zeck returned along with inker Bob McLeod, and the results were a commercial hit. Why wouldn't they be? Who wouldn't want to pick up this prestige format follow-up to such a great story? We don't know exactly how long it's been since the events of Kraven's Last Hunt in universe. A couple of pages in, Peter says something about after all this time. And a bit further on, Mary Jane says that they've spent months not talking about it. But it's never any more specific than that. What we do know is that Peter and MJ are at the funeral of the mother of one of his old college friends, Roger. Actually, coincidentally enough, Roger was in that issue of Marvel Team Up when Spider-Man first encountered Vermin. Just like Kraven's Last Hunt, we get to see a lot of Peter's internal monologue. Being at a funeral naturally makes him think about death, but it also gives him flashbacks. He sees Uncle Ben in the place of Roger's mother, and even himself in the coffin, in the ground. He gets a bit snappy with Mary Jane because she can tell that something's wrong with him, but he doesn't want to talk about it. So instead, he storms off and goes to get some fresh air. And we know what it means when Peter Parker wants to get some fresh air. We also know that whenever Spider-Man is out web swinging, he's bound to come across something. And indeed, he does, as a kid has fallen into a deep pit at a construction site. It's not particularly difficult for him to jump down into the pit, grab the kid and get him out again. However, whilst he's looking up out of the pit, he has another flashback. And suddenly, instead of looking out of the pit, he's looking out of the grave. Nonetheless, he does still manage to get the kid out, albeit whilst acting a little bit crazy. And as soon as he can, he leaves. He returns to the funeral and that continues without any more dramas. And then later on in the evening, he and Mary Jane talk more about death and the nature of the human soul. Then they go to sleep and Peter dreams. In his dream, we see him in a graveyard berating Kraven's tombstone. He awakes from the dream with a start, but soon after that, he is visited in his apartment by the ghost of Kraven. Now, in the early stages of this section, we are given a bit of a clue as to what's going on. As Kraven says quite cryptically, "I am you." He never says anything else even remotely like that in the rest of the book. But it does suggest to us that everything that's unfolding here is happening within Peter's subconscious. And that actually, although he did wake up from the dream, he quickly fell asleep again. During this section, he quickly finds himself back in a snow-swept graveyard. And Kraven is pleading with Peter, pointing to his gravestone, saying, "Lies, my life was lies." There's a mysterious entity there that explains what it is Kraven wants help with. His soul is trapped. It needs to be released. And it's trapped because he committed suicide. The sky is filled with countless forms, all wailing with torment and anguish, all of them victims of suicide. The mysterious spirit explains those tormented souls, including Kraven's. And he says that the honour that Kraven thought he would find in his death was a lie. He says that each spirit has a path, and from cradle to grave we walk it, falling, struggling back to our feet, learning from our struggles and moving on. But the ones who turn away from the path, the ones who with their own hands let go the most precious gift a spirit can ever receive, find themselves locked tight in a coffin of their own making. Okay, we get it. Because of their unique bond in life, the spirit says that Peter is the only person that can release Kraven's soul. But Peter refuses. He said, for what Kraven did to him, he wants him to suffer for all eternity. At that point, Peter hears his name being called. The graveyard vanishes, a door opens, and Mary Jane is there. We then have another discussion between the two of them about what's happened, and Peter says he's convinced he's going mad. MJ, however, is sure that she knows what's really going on. Peter feels guilty. He feels guilty for not being able to save Kraven, to stop him from committing suicide. Peter says, that's nonsense, I don't feel guilty. And MJ says, are you serious? You're Peter Parker. You feel guilty about everything. On top of that, she thinks he is also processing the events of being buried in the grave. She thinks he needs help, he needs to speak to someone. He disagrees. He knows what to do. He leaves her, much as he did during Kraven's Last Hunt, with a kiss by the window, and then he goes to Kraven's graveside. The entity is still there, as are the spirits of the suicide victims, and Kraven soon arrives too. Not just his spirit, but also his decaying body. And Spider-Man says, is this it? Is this the trial that I have to complete to help to release Kraven's soul? I have to battle his decaying body? And the entity says, no, you don't have to do it at all, but you can choose to do it. And Spider-Man does. Now, why does fighting Kraven's decaying corpse help to release his soul? I have no idea. But it is visually a good fight. Not that this is about the fight between Spider-Man and Kraven at all. This is about the fight between Peter and his guilty conscience. He even says at one point, people hurt, people die every day. I can't bring anyone back. I can't save anyone's soul. He even addresses the suicide directly by saying that if he'd known what Kraven was planning, he wouldn't have let him die. Briefly, it looks like this is going to be about Uncle Ben's death, because he says he wouldn't have let Kraven die like he let his Uncle Ben die, when he was young and stupid and so wrapped up in himself. He says that in all that time since then, has he learnt nothing if people are still dying? He says all these years he's done his best to make up for that, but still people die. And there it is. This is what it's all about. The fact that no matter how hard he tries, he can't always save everybody. And he feels that he is a failure as a result of that. He also feels that because he has allowed people to die, that he deserves nothing more than death. But then, as he and Kraven are grappling on the edge of what's more like a pit than a grave, he thinks of those fantastic moments in life. His happiness at being with Uncle Ben, his happiness when he is with MJ, and he decides, no, he's not going to turn his back on the most precious gift there is. He says, yeah, life can be a struggle, there can be pain and hardship, but if Uncle Ben's death has taught him anything, it's that we learn from our mistakes, from our heartbreak. We don't run away from it, and he isn't going to take the coward's way out. Okay, we get it. He says that in life, Kraven just stared into the darkness. He doesn't know what twisted Kraven or what finally broke his spirit, but he won't be broken. He chooses life. After he chooses life, Spider-Man says he's free. Free of the chains of guilt. And so is Kraven. And at that point, the two of them embrace and Kraven's spirit disappears. And if that doesn't really make sense to you, try to remember it wasn't actually Kraven's spirit. It was a creation of Spider-Man's subconscious mind, or unconscious mind. I've never really understood the difference between those two. Now left completely alone in the graveyard, after even the snowfall has stopped, Spider-Man thinks, maybe we can never know for sure if there's a larger meaning to our lives, a purpose and a plan. But we can make a choice. To listen hard for a song of hope, a song of belief in something bigger, that every heart can touch when it opens in love. And he writes Kraven's headstone. Again, Mary Jane wants to talk about everything that's happened, but Peter doesn't want to talk about it. But this time, it's not because he's afraid to talk about it like before. It's just that he doesn't want to cheapen the whole experience with words. They visit Roger once more, who is coming to terms with the loss of his mother, but he says that he has felt at times as though her spirit was there with him, and is that crazy? And Pete says, no, Roger, I don't think it's crazy at all. And we see that the inscription on Kraven's headstone has changed. It no longer reads, he died with honour. Instead, it says, free at last. I don't get it. I mean, I get the story. I understand Peter's internal battle with guilt, but who changed the headstone? As a standalone story, it's a nice little fable, but as canon, as part of Kraven the Hunter's story, does it undermine everything that happened in Kraven's last hunt? That is the question. Okay, so what's the answer? Yeah, it does a bit. With the psychological ghost of Kraven finally laid to rest, his character was never used again. Yeah, right. This one awesome storyline has cast a Kraven-shaped shadow over the Spider-Verse right up to the present day. aside from appearances in the likes of Marvel Tales and Spider-Man Chapter 1, in the mid-90s we had Kraven's son, Vladimir Kravenov, the Grim Hunter, seeking vengeance against Spider-Man, only to be reunited with his father at the hands of Kane. Then son number 2 popped up and filled an ever-changing role of antagonist, protagonist, whatever, the low point of which was the awful Get Kraven limited series from the early 2000s. And of course, they had to do it, didn't they? In 2010, they actually brought the original Kraven back from the dead to further detract from the finality of his once perfect ending. I guess it's true what they say, nobody stays dead in comic books, except for Bucky, Jason Todd and Uncle Ben. Well, at least that's what we used to say. And Vermin? I would say he had a more respectable publication history after this. After Jan DeMatteis took over as the regular writer on the Spectacular Spider-Man, he revisited his old creation more than once. First of all, he explored Vermin's troubled childhood in the 6-part Child Within storyline, before finally reverting him back to human form a year later in The Death of Vermin. The Batman version of the Jan DeMatteis pitch eventually saw the light of day in 1995 in the Going Sane storyline in Batman Legends of the Dark Knight. The legacy of Kraven's Last Hunt was not confined solely to the characters taking part in it. Part of the phenomenon of the original storyline's success was seen to be down to the format, the title-spanning approach that meant that all 3 titles were taken over by the tale. Not only that, but each cover proudly displayed a chapter number. The very next month, the same approach was taken with the Mad Dog Ward storyline, albeit it only lasted 1 month. Even when the different titles went back to their own self-contained storylines, they would still display part numbers on their covers, as if to say, look, this is part of a bigger, serious storyline. This approach was taken to its extreme when Maximum Carnage spread itself across 5 titles for 3 months. Where the creators are concerned, it ensured their place in comic book history. Jan DeMatteis was already long established, and he would go on to produce more great writing. Mike Zeck's body of work was smaller, but for both of them, their names are now inextricably linked to what is widely regarded as the greatest Spider-Man story of all time. Now that is something to have carved on your gravestone.